got the coast. He got the coast.
Very possibly.
Hey.
Разместите вакансию на ХХРУ всего за 199 рублей. Ведь здесь можно найти любого сотрудника, механика в автосервис, менеджера по продажам.
Right about that. When you think about his agenda, though, let's tick through some of the key things that he wants to accomplish. He's talked about criminal justice reform, addressing the protests and the core issues of those protesters, barring chokeholds, for example, for police officers. He's talked about building on Obamacare. Now, that gets very complicated because remember, the Supreme Court is going to hear a case about Obamacare, could potentially overturn it. He's talked about rebuilding Obamacare. This was one of the questions I asked him during the debate. What do you do if it gets tossed out? How do you rebuild that when your plan really focuses on starting from where we are right now? So that could be a real challenge, and he's going to have to work with Congress on that. And then think about his climate change plan. This is a $2 trillion plan. He says it's going to bring thousands of jobs. It's going to add to the U.S. economy. He says it's a jobs plan. That's how he's selling this. But if you are Republicans, if you're concerned about running up the deficit, it's going to be very hard to get them on board. And then, of course, what we've been seeing in recent weeks on Capitol Hill, the fact that they are stalled over COVID relief, that they haven't been able to get COVID relief through, despite the fact that so many Americans feel as though they are struggling right now economically. They want their kids to get back to school. He's going to have to tackle all of this. Now, we know that he and Senator Harris had a briefing on the economy and on COVID earlier this week. He's made the point that while this race was not called, he was going to get to work because he was so confident that ultimately he would be named president-elect. But all of these different agenda items that I lay out are very tough to get through a divided Congress.
Sorry, Kristen, let me jump in here because we have breaking news out of the White House. We have heard from the president. Hallie, what do you got?
Well, it's a fairly lengthy statement, Savannah, Chuck, and Lester. It is about 3.5 paragraphs. I won't read the entire thing, but I will read you some highlights, which is that the president is suggesting that Joe Biden is rushing to falsely pose as the winner, and that the president is alleging his media allies are trying hard to help him, insisting the election is far from over. This is, frankly, the statement that I think many of the president's critics and even some around him expected him to put out when the race was ultimately called as the direction it appeared to be heading in over the last 24 hours or so for Joe Biden. The president is resisting the results of the election, despite the fact that there has been no widespread evidence of fraud. He is insisting that he will continue moving forward with legal challenges in the courts, and he is blaming, as he has often done over the last 4 years that he's been in office, the news media for something that he simply does not like. The president, as we mentioned, is currently on his golf course. As I'm going through the rest of the statement, the president insists he's not going to rest until the American people have what he describes as an honest vote count. Again, this election process has worked exactly as expected. It took a little while. We knew it was going to take a little while. As Chuck knows, we knew it was going to take a while because of all those mail-in ballots, the ballots that in some states have been gone through. There will be recount fights likely. The Trump campaign has already threatened to do a recount in Wisconsin. We know that's where Georgia has been headed. But this is President Trump, true to what we have seen from him since the campaign started for him back in 2015, 2016, defiant even in the face of the reality that this presidential race has slipped out of his fingers. It is out of his grasp. He will fight to try to get it back. He cannot. It appears the writing is on the wall. Joe Biden has the 270 electoral votes he needs. The question now, can the president actually do anything about that if he refuses to concede? Concession is not a legal requirement. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that President Trump needs to deliver a formal speech calling for unity and handing the reins of power over to Joe Biden. That is a tradition. And if there's one thing we know about this president is that he is not been traditional in the past, and he has bucked that at every turn. I will tell you that there is a fair amount of Monday morning quarterbacking going on here. There is finger pointing now, as we have seen for quite a while with this White House, finger pointing over what some critics see as a sloppy strategy. People even close to the White House concerned that this legal push was a long shot from the very beginning, wondering why there wasn't a more sort of forceful face and forceful figure heading that push, given that was where it seemed to be headed even, Monday, Tuesday, last week, as it looked like the race was going to be very close. So the factionalism is happening here. The question is what the president does next. Does he lay low for a couple days? I would frankly be surprised to see that, given the defiance of the statement now out from the Trump campaign. I will say, too, as the transition now is upon us, we have, I believe, 74, if my math is right, 75 days until Inauguration Day. President Trump is still the president. And this transition is going to be very closely watched. It is possible that the president will try to shake things up. It has long been discussed, long been speculated that perhaps he would fire people like his defense secretary, Mark Esper. NBC News has reported that Secretary Esper has prepared a letter of resignation, according to 3 defense officials. There are questions of whether the president will try to use these last 2+ months in office to issue a series of executive orders, for example, trying to use the power that he still has on his way out the door, essentially, perhaps issue some pardons to people in his orbit. So it could be a turbulent couple of months until the middle of January, when President-elect Joe Biden will be sworn in just down Pennsylvania Avenue from where we are.
The statement is highly troubling.
Well, it is, and it is also completely of a piece with what he's been signaling. He in August, he said, I will claim that there is fraud if I lose, and today he is claiming that there is fraud if he loses. I just want to mention that NBC News is not alone. We are not the only news organization to come to this conclusion based on the evidence, including the Associated Press and Fox News. So when the president talks about his media allies, or the Joe Biden's media allies, his media allies also have called this race. Can we just go? Let's show your work.
Sure.
Let's explain why it is that the NBC decision desk has come to this conclusion, and the states that are involved here.
The irony is, he says beginning Monday. The lack of urgency, if there really is something, I don't mean that, and it was issued from the golf course. So I don't mean to say that sort of, I almost think that's an important, if there was seriousness to this, a belief in this, do you delay? My point is that it's clear this is political posturing.
These are the numbers, but in fairness, if he is within the threshold of a recount in one or more states, he is well within his rights, and there is nothing wrong with him pursuing that recount. If he believes there is fraud, he is well within his rights to prove it in court, and that process can go and can unfold.
But let me just remind you of something here. The problem he has, that the president has in order to do this. So he's going to pursue, let's take this, we got a Wisconsin recount that he wants to pursue. Pennsylvania recount, perhaps, and right now we are just above the threshold. It's a 0.5% in Pennsylvania. Right now it's just above the threshold. We actually expect Joe Biden's lead to continue to grow a little bit more. And then as the provisionals come in, it's possible that it goes back into the recount threshold inside of Pennsylvania, less than 0.5%. But we're talking 20,000 votes separating. That's the point we were making about Wisconsin. The best example, maybe 1,000, 1,500 votes can you find in a recount. Look at the Florida recount. You could argue maybe they found 1,000 at the end of the day. It was about a 1,200 or 1,300 vote lead that eventually got down to 537. To find 21,000 votes in Wisconsin, 30,000 votes there. Even the 6,000 votes or 8,000 votes that they would need out of Georgia in a recount there, let alone what would happen in Arizona. So the point is, when you start to look at this, Savannah, you held up a note. You go, would this be a 5-front war? The point is that that's it. And by the way, with also cross currents, you got to argue in one place to limit some ballots being counted in certain states because they help the president's case. But then in other states, he's going to want to expand the counting on that or expand provisionals, particularly in Arizona. I think you've explained it fairly
well, but for Joe Biden right now, he is leading in all of the relevant battleground states except for North Carolina. But even if Pennsylvania were to somehow disappear, and obviously NBC News does not believe that to be the case, he still has a potential Georgia-Nevada track.
Not only
that. Or he has an Arizona-Nevada track.
Or or I believe at this point now, Georgia and Nevada.
Correct. I just looked it up.
Georgia, Arizona,
Georgia and Nevada.
Arizona,
even if he
Nevada.
loses Arizona,
Right.
Georgia and Nevada would get him
Any
to
two of those three,
275.
right? So that's and so he's got to somehow overtake all of those. And by the way, I do want to, and this is an important aspect of this story. This is the most likely now electoral vote, final electoral vote between the two, 306-232. 306-232 is what we had 4 years ago, and it sort of reinforces the point that I've been trying to make here, which is the 2016 election was not an outlier. This is a country that is divided along the lines we've been divided on, and Joe Biden won because he put together Hillary Clinton's vote and the none of the above vote from 4 years ago, who decided, I don't know if I want another 4 years of this. I'm going to go with Joe Biden.
I want to show
and he won the presidency.
some folks some video that just came in to our newsroom. This is the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and we're hearing this story. Spontaneous applause and celebration outpouring on the streets of some of these cities, which were known to be fans of Joe Biden. We saw in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in Trump country, some Trump supporters. So I think we're going to start to see, as this news on a Saturday morning starts to get out, we're going to see these the evidence of the divided country we have pouring out into the streets.
Well,
of
the
is
cities,
this the White House?
And by the way, the cities, of
That's
course,
the
have
White
been the more bluer areas. So you're going to see a lot of cities in one place, and you're going to see perhaps a lot of anger in some
As
other
we saw in
parts.
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
And Hillary Clinton has tweeted memorably that the voters have spoken. It's a history-making ticket, a repudiation of Trump, and a new page for America. Thank you to everyone who helped make this happen. Onward together.
I think we have a Joe Biden statement. Kristen Welker in Wilmington. What do you got?
Savannah, we're hearing from the now president-elect Joe Biden. Let me read you his statement. This is just coming in. I am honored and humbled by the trust the American people have placed in me and in Vice President-elect Harris. In the face of unprecedented obstacles, a record number of Americans voted, proving once again that democracy beats deep in the heart of America. With the campaign over, it's time to put the anger and the harsh rhetoric behind us and come together as a nation. It's time for America to unite and to heal. We are the United States of America, and there's nothing we can't do if we do it together. So there you see again Joe Biden really stressing and calling for unity in this moment, acknowledging the fact that these results in these key battleground states were close, acknowledging that it is going to be up to him now to try to unify what is a deeply divided nation. In terms of the reaction that we're getting from President Trump, I think it bears reminding people and underscoring something that you said, Savannah, which is that this was not a surprise to the Biden campaign. They were prepared for this type of reaction from President Trump. In fact, they put out a statement yesterday, if I could just read that to remind people what their posture is. As we said on July 19th, the American people will decide this election, and the United States government is perfectly capable of escorting trespassers out of the White House. So to that point, defiance from the Biden campaign, from President-elect Joe Biden, who is clearly not going to be daunted by the comments of President Trump. In terms of those legal battles, the Biden campaign in the days leading up to this historic moment have called those legal challenges meritless. They've called them charades, and they say they have a team of lawyers ready to fight them. So it is significant, though, that we're getting our first reaction from Joe Biden himself as he prepares to take the mantle of president-elect. Savannah and Lester.
Kristen Welker, thank you. As we look at that crowd at Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C., near the White House. And again, you saw some of the images from New York. One person described it to me as very much like the saluting the medical heroes that was a part of the COVID response. People on balconies and out of their windows celebrating. Again, these are images coming from obviously two very blue parts of this country, but a lot of passions in the streets right now.
Let's go to Michael Beschloss. We need a historian at a moment like this. And Michael, take a step back, will you? You're the historian. We're the journalists. We live in the moment. You live in over the course of time. How do you reflect on what has just unfolded?
Well, the first thing, Savannah, that occurs to me is this. Philadelphia spoke in 1787. We got a constitution and a country. Philadelphia spoke in 2020, and we've got a new president of the United States. In a way, it's really circular. And that theme of healing and unity that all of you have been talking about this morning is absolutely central. The founders always wanted us all to fight over policies. They felt that was the way of having the best country because they didn't want the United States to be like England, where all the policies were made by the king. But at the same time, they wanted us to fight over policies and over who would be a president of the United States, for instance. But at the end of the day, they wanted compromise, they wanted civility, they wanted conciliation. And, Gerald Ford's memoirs were called A Time to Heal. I think that's a perfect word for this moment. This moment could not be more of a time to heal for the United States of America.
It is just after 12 o'clock here on the East Coast. If you're just joining us, there's the headline at the bottom of your screen. President-elect Joe Biden. NBC is projecting that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. And you see some of the reaction there. I want to bring in, if I can, David Plouffe into the conversation, who was campaign manager for President Obama. And David, with you, I'd like to talk about the next, this period between now and January 20th, with a defiant President Trump right now. Explain how this is going to work. Transition is so key between two administrations.
Well, it is, Lester, particularly given the pandemic and all the economic challenges. But I'd start by saying Donald Trump might not move on, but the rest of the world is going to move on. In a matter of days, Joe Biden will be announcing who his various cabinet secretaries are going to be. He'll be meeting and talking to members of Congress in both parties. So Trump, to me, becomes increasingly irrelevant, other than the peaceful transfer of power, a sitting president, an incoming president working carefully on transition has always been a hallmark of our democracy. So that's what concerns me. It doesn't concern me the statements he's going to make, or is there some legal route here for Trump to undermine that? We know that's not the case. But we need, members of his administration to work cooperatively with the incoming Biden administration. But listen, the world's going to look very different really in a matter of days. Again, as he says, here's who my Secretary of Treasury is going to be, my Health Secretary, my Attorney General, I think he'll start talking to Mitch McConnell and Republicans in Congress, of course, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So I think that's where we are. So I think we should not pay much attention, in my view, to the things Trump's saying about the election. The important thing is he going to do anything to undermine the peaceful transfer of power in terms of working cooperatively? And is he going to fire a lot more people? Are there going to be executive orders done to benefit, he or his family? That's what we need to be concerned about.
And David, what tone would you advise Joe Biden to take vis-a-vis those folks who did vote for Donald Trump and who may be believing what he says about a fraudulent election, an election that has been stolen? It's one thing for you, you're a Democrat, you say we're not going to pay attention to that, but there are millions of Americans who will. How should Joe Biden speak to them and address that?
Well, my sense, Savannah, is you're going to have everybody from Senate Republicans to Republican governors to even folks on Fox News saying the election's over. Just to go back to the map Chuck Todd was at, this is not a close election historically. Okay, Joe Biden's going to win with a higher percentage of the popular vote than Barack Obama did in 2012, and certainly Donald Trump did in 2016, than George W. Bush did in either of his elections. And his electoral vote's going to be north of 300 in all likelihood. So it's a significant win. And again, I think things start changing today. That intensifies tomorrow. So Donald Trump may not be satisfied, but I think Joe Biden is going to reach out to those voters. I'm sure it's one of the first things he's going to say tonight is I'm going to be a president for all of you, and speak to the fact that I know a lot of people voted against me. I know people have concerns about the election because of what Donald Trump's saying, but this is a free and fair election, and I'm going to go out there and fight with everything I have for you, which is he's going to have the toughest challenge any incoming president has had since FDR. So he needs to rally the American people, as many as he can, around some of his policy prescriptions and how he's going to lead us out of this pandemic.
And I think, too, Savannah, everything we've seen from the former vice president, now president-elect, underscores that he's likely to do what David was just outlining. This is someone who has had a sort of North Star on his campaign all the way along. He had so many people doubting him in the primary, in the general election, even his own, sometimes campaign staffers behind the scenes wondering if he was making the right set of decisions. But he stayed true to that, even in the face of that kind of opposition. He kept saying, what's happening on Twitter does not represent what's happening everywhere. The American people want something broader than what's happening. And he ultimately was vindicated in that. And everything that we know about Joe Biden says that he is going to be someone, he has a deep, long-standing, decades-long, really, relationship with Mitch McConnell, who, may be the Republican leader, again, may not be, depending on those two runoffs. But he is someone who, when Obama was president, when we had President Obama, it was Vice President Joe Biden who was cutting deals with members of Congress and working with those relationships. So I think we are about to enter a very different era. And the cabinet question is still an open one, I think, partly because control of the Senate is not determined yet. So the kinds of cabinet nominees that Joe Biden could get through a Democratic Senate might be different than the ones he could get through a Republican Senate. But I'm not sure that Joe Biden really would want. I feel like he knows who he wants in his cabinet, and it may actually line up with the Republican Senate.
Is this the signature challenge, Andrea, for Joe Biden going forward? I mean, yes, he knows he's going to face Republican opposition. There's nothing new about that. The parties are always at loggerheads. But within his own party, he has, as Casey just outlined, a long history of rather centrist streaks. Sure. That is not where the activism in the Democratic Party is right now. How will he navigate that terrain?
Well, there are two pieces to that, I believe. The first is the transition between
Я просто плохой, я не нацист, я не националист. Я не верю в национальность, я верю в дух человеческий, что ли, как вот тебе скажешь. Да, что все люди хотят любить, как сказать, в результате получается, если все нормально в голове, то у тебя размножение получается. Но это не в обиду. Ничего страшного, да, все равно как-то получается, не знаю, знаете. То есть любить там, как говорится, семья, как-то. Ну, наверное, да, может быть. Я коренье говорю, да. Я так думаю, даже викинги так делали, понимаешь? Даже какие-то там. Только, наверное. Ну, я ж тебе не говорю, я тебе просто говорю, да. А это просто то, что мы как мужики не можем разрешить. Ты согласен? Да. Ну это вроде просто, но не просто. Ну популярно, ну так мир устроен. Хочешь отдыхать, хочешь, да. Вот, да. Я лично думаю, что у всех есть своя красота. И у японцев, и у корейцев, у всех, да. Ну, не будем там растения, животные трогать их не обязательно, я думаю. То есть, как бы, да, ну, это, вот эти собаки-то, это нет, ну, это уже другое просто, там, что-то другое, я понял. Да. Какие вот с мясом. Это так просто сказать, что давайте не воевать, давайте будем, то есть, ну вот видишь, не получается так. Я понял, вот, да. Ну, да. Ну, нет, жить надо, короче, все. Понимаешь, как бы, какая штука? Он тебя не понял, да. Ну, можно так сказать. Ну, хорошо, понимаю. Мы все вместе в ответе за то, что приходит к нам, понимаете, да. Хата с краю, это ничего нового, да. Ну, да. Я так думаю тоже так, да. Нет, он про себя так думает.